Hi, everyone. So glad you joined me this time. Trust me, this is going to be one that you don't want to miss. I have a guest on the show with me who is not somebody I know at all, in fact, but I do know her story a bit. And so Susan Snow is here on my show. Welcome, Susan.
Hello. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Happy to have you. I'm not going to introduce you. I want you to talk about yourself. All I would like to say is start with the fact that you have a book, and
I do.
what a title. Can I say the title? I'm going to say The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. So already anybody who knows me out there knows that this is just, I'm like, sit up tight, because I love that title.
Your ears perked up.
They did. Oh my gosh. So can you tell us a bit about who you are and why you wrote a book called The Other Side of the Gun?
Sure, absolutely. So, I am the daughter of a Los Angeles police detective who was ambushed and murdered when he was picking up my then 6-year-old brother from school. And this was back October 31st of 1985. I was 17 at the time. And when it happened, it was Halloween. We all had our plans for the night. Typical teenage fashion, I wanted to go to a party. And my dad and myself had a little argument the morning before this all happened in regards to that party. He didn't want me to go. It was a school night, and he was very strict. He was pretty strict father, but lovely human being at the same time. And so that night, I was bound and determined to go to this party. He was testifying that day in court on a case that he was the lead detective on. And the plan was he was going to pick up my brother, come home, and then I was going to go to this party. And then he was going to take my brother trick-or-treating kind of thing. And my mom, she was home with me, and it was late afternoon. And the phone rang. And when the phone rang, I picked it up, thinking it was for me anyways. And I picked it up, and it was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And I just, I heard the words, but I didn't hear the words, handed the phone directly to my mom, who had peeked around the corner, and she was getting her costume off. And I could watch her on the phone and her demeanor, and I knew it was bad. So she got off the phone and she looked at me and said, we're going to the school. So we got in the car. Neither one of us spoke to each other. We got to the school, and you parked in the middle. It was like a middle parking lot. And the kids, this was the end of the day, so the kids were getting let out on the back side of the school. We started heading that way and saw my dad's truck. And there was ambulances and police officers walking around, and they had tears in their eyes. And when we rounded the corner towards the truck, we saw my dad's body in the aftermath. And I watched my mom just drop, and a police officer was holding her back. And I just stood there, and my world shattered. But at the same time, I was not exactly understanding what I was seeing.
Yeah.
And I was confused because I saw an ambulance, but they weren't doing anything. And we were kind of escorted off to an office. My mom was escorted away by some police officers, and I was sitting in the chair still trying to process what just happened and why aren't they helping him? I just kept saying that. I heard two ladies start to talk in the office, and one of them said, yes, Mr. Williams is deceased. He died. And that was when it hit me. And I wanted to run. I wanted to physically run out of there. But my body was literally just, I felt like I had cement in my legs. I couldn't move. And I just couldn't believe what I was experiencing. And I wanted to run. I wanted to run, and I couldn't physically do it. And my mom came around the corner and she looked at me and said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And even though part of me wanted to run, I still, where was my brother? Is he okay? Is he hurt? What did he see? I had all of these things swirling in my head. And my mom said, "I'm sending you away." And part of me wanted to be with the family unit. I wanted to stay with my mom and my brother, but I got sent away anyways.
Mm.
So that night I had to try to, with this poor neighbor who knew my parents, and she's trying to navigate her feelings of shock and everything. And she's got his daughter in her living room just losing it. I was just inconsolable. And all I wanted at that time was my boyfriend. We had only been dating 3 months prior to my dad's death. But I wanted him there. He was kind of my safe space, kind of like my dad, So he showed up, but didn't get enough information on the phone. So when he showed up, he thought that my dad was at the hospital. So he kept trying, to coax me out of the door with him to go, wherever. And he was like, "What hospital is he at? Let's just go, get your jacket, And the words couldn't come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Because if they did, they were real. And I just struggled. I sat there and I struggled. And finally, I just blurted it out. He's not there. He's gone. And my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now, he looked at me and he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital." And I watched my boyfriend drop to his knees. And we both were kids. He was 19. I was 17. And neither of us knew how to navigate all of these things that were going on, And it was difficult. It was so difficult. And when I did go back home, there were so many people. My neighborhood was packed full of police officers, helicopters, strangers in my house that I'd never seen before. I'm sure they were dignitaries and whoever, victims advocates and whatever, but I didn't see my mom. I didn't see my brother. As soon as I got home, I went straight into my room and hid. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And nobody came to the door. Nobody checked on me anyways. And my boyfriend stayed with me for a little bit and then he left. The next morning was, from what I remember, I didn't even see my brother until the following day, mid-afternoon. And since he was 6 years old, he had a different experience. And so for me, I had heard him crying all night and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help him because I had nothing left.
Yeah.
And I just assumed my mom would be the one to console him. And so when I did see him, I was able to hug him and tell him I loved him. But that time was really, I lived in a fog. I felt like people were just moving me in the direction I needed to go. I didn't feel like I was actually functioning. I was barely taking showers. I was, I just wanted to stay in bed. And I didn't understand what was going on either. I mean, I understand this was 19 and there was no talk of mental health back then.
Mm-mm.
There was no talk of PTSD back then. There were no resources for teenagers at the time. And so I really struggled with wanting and needing someone to help me figure out why all of this stuff was swirling in my head. I had severe depression. My sense of security was gone. Completely gone. So that made me anxious. I had panic attacks. Didn't know what those were. Got through them with the skin of my teeth. and I wanted to be with my dad.
Yeah.
And I had suicidal ideation. And again, didn't know what that was. Didn't know how to verbalize it. Didn't know anything, I just knew that I felt terrible. And I felt like this was always going to be this way. I was never going to get better. It was just, when you're in it and you're swirling in it, it's hard to see the light.
Mm. Yeah, impossible. Can I just first say, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that you experienced such a traumatic, you and your family. Your description of it is riveting and heartbreaking to think of a 17-year-old girl enduring that. So I'm so sorry. Can I ask what your father's name is?
His name was Thomas C. Williams.
Sound like a pretty terrific guy.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
He was, people ask me all the time what kind of dad he was. He was very present. And when I say that is when he was with you, whether you were a friend, a colleague, his wife, his kid, when he was with you and he was talking with you, he made you feel like you were the only person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Very present. I felt very secure with him. And, he was a detective when he was murdered. He wasn't a street cop. And he was a robbery homicide detective. And when he became a detective, I had a false sense of security. Yeah. I thought he's got a desk job now. Nothing bad could ever happen to him. He goes there after the fact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when this happened, it just really ripped the carpet out from underneath me. I had no sense of security after that. I mean, I felt a little secure with my boyfriend, but my dad was gone, and I think the harder part is that, my mom and I have always had, our relationship was not a healthy one looking back. And he was kind of the go-between, the voice of reason. And so when he died, I lost that too. And I didn't know how I was going to navigate this relationship with my own mother. Yeah. And the other side of that is that, I had some abandonment issues for a couple of reasons. I never felt back then. I mean, it was such a huge, huge story within the media. It took the media 2 days to figure out he had a teenage daughter because all the focus obviously was on my brother and my mother. Mm. And my father. And so I had this sense of I'm not important in this scenario.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a little bit about your immediate reaction, which, the shock.
Yeah.
And that feeling of being disconnected to yourself and not knowing what to believe or knowing what to do. Yeah. And then just kind of right after that, your subsequent days of not wanting to get out of bed and just being kind of directed where to go, an automatic pilot type of thing, all very, very normal. Anybody out there listening about the shock of something, that's very normal behavior that you were experiencing. Not that you would have known that, but
right.
I'm sure you
now
see
I
that
do.
now. Yeah, exactly. And then you talked a little bit about the fact that your father was this go-between that played this role between you and your mother. So how did what happened to you and your family affect you as time went on?
Well, I think a lot of it was, so my mom is, I'm just learning this. It took me 54 years to figure this out, but my mom is a narcissistic personality. So when this happened, and I don't fault her for this because everybody deals with trauma and grief differently, right? And however, she kind of turtled and lost her identity and just kind of within herself. And in that, she started drinking because that was how she was able to cope with the loss and the hurt and the pain. And I watched this. And as my brother got older, he made some bad choices himself. Now my brother and I are really, really close. It's been a healing journey for us as well. But I watched them deal with coping with their loss and their grief in a more self-sabotaging way. For me, people would say things to me like, "You are so strong, and you're so brave, and you're so this, and you're so that." And so what I ended up doing is I created an emotional mask, and I wore it. Now, I could be a mess in the interior, but what I put outside, no one knew.
Mm-hmm.
No one knew. No one knew that I was suicidal. No one knew that I had panic attacks. Nobody knew. My boyfriend knew, but he didn't even know that I was suicidal really until he read my book. We've been together 38 years. So I always, because I didn't have help in the navigation of all of these things, my mindset was always, I have to do this on my own. I got to figure this out on my own. My mom isn't there. She's, in her own world. And I have to figure this out. I don't have any adults around me to help me with this. So I'm going to have to figure this out.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that did happen about a month after my dad's death, LAPD came to my mother and said, "We want to pay for therapy for all three of you." And so my mom came to me and she said, the victim's advocate, and I hate that word, but I hate victim. The victim's advocate came and said that, we should all go into therapy. And so she said, "So you're going to see a therapist." And being 17, I was like, in my head, that's a shrink. And you only go to people like that when you're crazy. So, that was my teenage mentality back then. So, but because I did what people told me to do, I went. And in hindsight, I feel like the man that I saw really was not either educated enough or was not prepared enough to handle the amount of trauma. So he kept our sessions very generic. He only wanted to talk about my relationship with my mom, my relationship with my brother, my boyfriend, and school. Not once did he ever ask me how that night affected me, which I know as a therapist, you're probably going, "What?"
Yeah.
But he never did. And every session I kept thinking, today's the day. He's going to figure me out. He's going to fix me. Now, remember, I wasn't exactly verbalizing what was going on either because I didn't know what it was.
Right.
I didn't know how to verbalize it. But I bet if he had asked me a question, it would open up that conversation, but he didn't. So an entire year I saw him. And at the end of the year, he said, "Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady and you are going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore." And I left his office and I was like, wait, I'm a mess.
Yeah.
I still have all this stuff. Like what? So what I ended up putting into my brain was that, okay, well, I guess I snapped. I'm damaged. I'm crazy. And this is what I'm going to just have to deal with for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Even a professional can't help me.
Wow. The awareness around trauma and grief and PTSD, it's just...
It all intertwines.
Yeah, and
for
people,
sure.
for sure in the 80s, there was a lot less known.
Yeah.
I mean, the explosion around trauma and grief now is just understanding that it's so prevalent. And I always tell people it's not sexy like bipolar or,
No.
trauma work is a slog.
It's just post-trauma. I hate the disorder part because it just feels so negative.
Yeah.
So, 14 years I dealt with all of this stuff. And obviously went on to marry the boyfriend. And I had 2 children. And, relationship with mom didn't change because mom is mom. And so I just kind of had to deal with things on my own, and it affected me. It affected my relationships. It affected my parenting. It affected how everything in my life it affected because I wasn't dealing with it. I didn't see things. I have a chapter, rose-colored glasses, because I literally walked around like that. And that's not healthy either, because I was not able to see what was truly in front of me. And so 14 years later, we had moved to Colorado, 1997. And 2 years later, the Columbine shootings happened in Littleton, Colorado.
Yeah.
And I was working as a hairdresser at the time. I was working on some clients that day, and I put my client under the dryer, went to the back into our little back area, took a break, and turned on the TV. And when I turned on the little TV, all of the coverage was on. And I stood there, and something really crazy happened. I started having flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I started sweating. I turned white as a ghost and clammy. And my colleagues were looking at me and they couldn't understand what was going on because I didn't tell anyone my story either. So they were asking me questions like, you're too young to have kids there. Do you live there? Do you have friends that have kids there? Like, what is going on with you? And I couldn't answer them. I didn't know what was happening to me. Remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I had no idea what was happening to me, but I knew I needed to do my clients. So I put the mask back on and I went out and I finished my day like nothing happened.
Mm.
Everybody around me was devastated, but I wasn't letting myself go there while I was working.
Yeah. Well, it must have felt incredibly terrifying to go there because of the reaction you had when you saw it on television. Anyone out there that doesn't know, this podcast does get listened to outside of the country. That was 99, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, there was I think it's kind of the first as far as we're tracking.
Two kids
shooting
came into the school and shot up a bunch of students and a teacher. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember it being just it was a shock because prior to that, it wasn't like now. It wasn't happening all the time. And not to say it's any less shocking today, because of course it is, but it was really the first in my mind and how I see it and remember it. So I can only imagine for you, all of that trigger happening.
Well, and I didn't even know about triggers. So when I was watching it, I saw the kids around my same age.
Yeah.
I saw the ambulances and the police officers and all the things, but still couldn't put 2 and 2 together of why I was having this reaction. When I stepped out of the salon and started to drive home, all of the feelings and emotions came flooding back.
Yeah.
I started to spiral. And it was scary because I would have visions of driving off the road and ending it. I felt like I was in so much pain and I wanted it to go away.
Yeah.
My husband, probably 2 or 3 days later, he was watching this and he said it was a slippery slope. But he stopped me at the door and he said, you have 2 choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital. And I had 2 babies now. And I was terrified that I was going to leave my children. So I went to get help. I went to the doctor first and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he said, and we need to find you a therapist. And I just shook my head. I was like, wait a minute. I tried that 14 years ago and they didn't heal me.
Yeah.
What makes you think it's going to happen this time?
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm going to give you some, references. So I went and I saw this woman. Thank God. This woman that I saw specialized in severe trauma and PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
So within 5 minutes of sitting down with her and telling her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with, she looked at me and she said, Susan, everything that you have dealt with since you were 17 years old is totally normal because you have PTSD. And I was like confused because I thought, wait a minute, I'm not in the military.
Yeah.
I didn't go to a war. And she said, nope. She said, anyone who goes through anything traumatic can experience PTSD. But what you need to know is PTSD isn't something that goes away. It's something you manage. You learn to manage the different things that come up. And I swear, I say this all the time, I felt like the sky opened up and rainbows shot out. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
And I now had someone that was going to be able to come alongside me and guide me in the healing process. And so I finally had hope. And the fact that she was specific to severe trauma and PTSD, she was the perfect person for me. I felt completely safe with her. I felt like I could be vulnerable with her, and I was in a safe space.
And you didn't have to put on the mask.
No more mask.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm so pleased that your husband forced it.
Oh, yeah.
But also that, yeah, you were, because this is the issue out there is like people don't know what they need. They don't know what's going on. People just know, like you said, I know I just don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And society's message is like you were rewarded by that first therapist of being the strong one with the mask on. That's rewarded for being strong in the face of things. The subtitle of your book, My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency, really attracted me because I talk about resiliency a lot and I love resiliency. Resiliency is not putting on a mask and pretending nothing's wrong. Resiliency is the actual healing and then using that knowledge about yourself to be able to sort of get back up again, to trust again, to love again, to feel alive again after going through pain. And so your journey from trauma to resiliency, was that the turning point really for the healing to begin, is when you finally had that therapist?
100%.
Yeah.
She knew that we had a long road. And I had never been in therapy, like real therapy before, especially cognitive therapies. And so the first thing she said, we're going to do this in baby steps because I'm not throwing the whole arsenal at you at once. So we decided the first thing I was going to do was attack the issue that I was dealing with currently. I did not sleep ever, like a full night's rest, for 14 years. And it was because, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners understand this, it's because once I started to lay down, my brain would turn on, and it was worst case scenario of everything.
Yeah.
It was a very dark place, and it kept me up. A lot of times I'd shut my eyes and I would go back to that night.
Yeah.
And so I was terrified of actually sleeping. So she said, what we're going to do is we're going to start to journal. And I thought, journaling, whatever. Like, that sounds so weird. But she said, no, we're going to do this. And she said, here's the thing, Susan, like, journaling isn't always writing. You can use music. You can do art. You can do whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just write. I've always kind of been that way where I've written stuff. And that was my first journaling journey. And she said, just try it for a week. What I want you to do, and she gave me some prompts, and I just want you to write down everything that's in your head, put it in a notebook and put it away and go to bed. And I was like, all right, what do I have to lose?
Yeah.
So I did. And after a week, I started to realize, oh my gosh, it works. I'm actually sleeping through the night peacefully. And I thought, this does work.
Yeah.
And then we moved into working on the things of my anxiety. So she started teaching me the tapping techniques and affirmations with tapping as well. We dove into breath work, box breathing, all of that type of breathing techniques. And then as I started to progress and get better, my anxiety wasn't quite as much. I felt totally, completely comfortable with her and anyone else that she would send me to. So she sent me to a woman who did EMDR work. And I did some sessions there. That was very powerful. That therapist moved away and I didn't trust anyone else, so I never went back. And I wish I had, in hindsight, I wish I had. But I will tell you, writing this book, it took me 4.5 years to write it. Because I knew in the very beginning that this was going to be my story and I needed to be as authentic as possible. And in doing that, I had a lot of fear because in telling my story, I knew that I would be telling my mom's story as well. And so I had fear that that was going to blow up that relationship. I had fear about my safety, and I had a lot of fear around it. But anytime I felt that fear, I also knew that the reason behind this book was to help other people who were in their healing journey or needed to start their healing journey, or giving them hope and showing them what resiliency looks like. And that I'm not special. Like, anyone can get to resiliency. They just have to do the work.
Yeah.
And the work sucks. Like, it's not fun. I'm not going to candy coat it, right? It's a lot. But you can't give in to fear because healing won't really happen.
Right.
So every time, and I have a tagline, bulldoze your fear. It's one of my talks. Because every time I had that feeling like, oh, this is going to be bad. It's going to blow up my world. It's going to blow up my relationship. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. I kept thinking of those other faces on the other side.
Yeah.
Including my own brother, including my own husband and my own kids.
Yeah.
Like, this was my legacy for them. So anytime I felt that, I just kept bulldozing through. I was like, nope, I just got to keep moving forward. And I'm so grateful that I did, because the amount of healing that happened within the writing was tremendous. And I see things clearly. No rose-colored glasses, no emotional mask. What you see is what you get. And at the same time, I feel like because of that, I'm able to tell my story. I'm able to give people a safe space to be able to be vulnerable. And it happens. I've had multiple people who I have shared with them my story, and they have shared theirs. And they've said a lot of them have said, I have never told anyone this ever. Or I just feel like you understand, or whatever, and I feel like, at this point, I'm living in my purpose. This is my purpose. This is my message.
And it's such a powerful message, and that I don't think anybody else could tell it quite the way that you are able to tell it, because of what you went through. What happened to you in your life was so incredibly hurtful and just devastating. And for you to, like a lot of people, the reaction of just covering up and trying to move on because you didn't understand, and nobody was there to say to you, listen, this is going to hurt and you're going to need some help. It's I love to highlight misunderstandings and myths on this podcast about what therapy is and what therapy does. And there's this old term about, why would I just want to wallow? Like the idea of coming to talk about what hurts is wallowing in the pain, and what's healing is just to pretend it's just not there anymore and move forward. Well, you are testament to what the pain of trying to pretend it didn't happen and just push through, of having all those years of trouble sleeping, of suicidal thoughts, of depression, anxiety. You are a walking example of what happens when we don't heal, when we don't do that work. And it's not about wallowing, because the first thing you describe of meeting with that clinician when she says we're going to journal, what she gave you right there was such a beautiful gift. She said, I believe you, and I know that you have a story to tell, and I want to sit here and I want to hear it, and I want to know you. What a beautiful, validation.
Yep.
That you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you.
I'm not crazy.
You're not crazy. You're just reacting to pain. And it was painful. And a lot of people out there have painful things. Maybe not a lot of people have this type of incredible pain, but it's all relative to our own experiences.
Oh, yeah. And so everybody's trauma is their trauma, and it's, I never discount anyone else's trauma, or hurt or grief or any of that. And I think a lot of it too is that, it is the fear. Like, people are fearful of reliving and re-going through that and, wallowing, as you said. It's a fear. And I think it's a fear of the same fear I had was, am I going to lose myself? Am I going to be able to come back from this? And, what I tell people is, as long as you're with someone of, a professional who, one, understands the type of trauma that you have gone through so that they can guide you in the right, modalities that are going to help you. But just being able to be vulnerable, people are so fearful of being vulnerable and, losing themselves. And I felt the same way. But what I realized is, as I was being vulnerable, and especially in writing, this book is like, I am out there. Like, this is me. And so, it's just the amazing power of being vulnerable. I think a lot of people too feel like vulnerability is weakness, and it's not. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
You are actually being brave. You're actually standing out there, and saying, hey, this happened to me. This is how I felt. This isn't you feeling sorry for yourself. This isn't you being a victim, right? That was the other thing. I never took that victim mentality. I may have had that come up, but I never wore the victim thing.
Yeah.
And my mom did, my brother did, right? Those were their choices.
Yeah.
And that's why I said I hate that word, victim.
Yeah.
We're all survivors of what we dealt with.
Yeah.
We're all survivors. So, I think it's just really important that people understand that by taking the steps to heal yourself, it's brave. You're taking your power back from whatever it is that happened to you. You're taking that power back. So I feel like when I tell people that, it gives them some hope.
Yeah.
It's a mentality change. It's thinking, oh my gosh, I went through this, but I'm not going to let it, envelop me. I want to learn from it. What is this experience going to teach me? And so, there's strength in that. And
oh gosh, so much strength.
I'm
Yeah.
grateful. I'm grateful that I had to go through this, and I'm grateful that I had to heal in the way that I did, and I had to relive and have all those emotions and everything. But in writing, I didn't write this book till I was 50 years old. And the reason I waited is because I needed to be strong enough mentality wise that I was able to and have the tools. So if something did come up for me, I was able to heal from it.
Yeah.
So, because people ask me, why'd you wait till you were 50 to write this book? It happened when you were 17. And I tell
Yeah.
them I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
I was not ready.
You have to trust that.
And I had to trust myself that I knew that being vulnerable like this and really putting myself out there and telling my story, that I was going to go through these emotions. And there were days where I had to give myself grace and be like, I'm a realtor by trade, and I couldn't talk to clients. I couldn't show property. I was just a mess. Like I said, you know what, Susan, this is a lot. I gave myself grace, your mental health days, and did whatever I could for myself to find joy that day. And the next day was a new day. And that was my mentality.
Such a powerful message for that too, as far as understanding the time and understanding your own abilities and giving yourself grace for the days or the moments when we just don't have it. And that's okay. And I was thinking when you were talking, I just thought, what a beautiful gift this book is to that 17-year-old,
Yeah.
all this learning, all this information, all this compassion and kindness and understanding. And that's therapy too, is this idea that we want to help heal the younger self, that if it was a younger self that went through whatever. And I feel like in addition to the rest of us benefiting from this book, but what a beautiful gift to yourself of validation and courage. Absolutely gorgeous.
It was a definite labor of love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing this. We said before we started, I was going to try to keep this to 30 minutes. I'm proud of us that we're stopping at 48 because, man, I could talk to you all the time. You are you're an inspiration, and not because you got a mask on, but because you don't. And I'm just incredibly proud of you and so
Thank
grateful that not only did I get to interview you, but you've written a book about this that other people can read, and we can all understand this journey, because it's overwhelming to people and they don't understand. And some people think, like you started with, that this is the way they're going to be, that there is no way out.
Yep.
And it's just not true. And we know that. And you are a shining example of that. Not to say, as you said, there aren't days where things back up, because they do. This was hard. Nothing's ever going to not be hard about that.
Right.
But your tools and your capabilities and your belief in yourself and the people around you, your support system, all of that, to say you're worth getting that help and making sure that you just kind of stay on that, like that you stay aware of how that might show up for you sometimes.
Yep.
I am really very grateful. People can get your book, The Other Side of the Gun, I'm assuming wherever
Amazon.
we buy books. Amazon?
On Amazon. Okay. I am on Barnes and Noble. And I'm on Amazon. You can get the book either in paperback form or it is on Kindle form. And so if you're in Kindle Unlimited program, you can actually read my book for free. And I am in the process. I am going to be reading my own book and doing my own audiobook. So that will come out this year for sure.
Interesting.
I've just been bugged by a lot of people to get it in audio form.
Yeah.
And they want me to do it. So I am going to do my own audiobook.
So I'll put a link to it, obviously, in the show notes. And anywhere else people can find you.
Yeah, I have a website. It's Susan Snow Speaks, and it has information on the book. It also has information on my speaking. I am a speaker, and I am starting a coaching, resiliency coaching. So you can, if you're interested in talking to me, or even if you have questions or whatever, feel free to. There's a page there that you can fill out your information, and I would be more than happy to get back to you and
Great.
and answer any questions that you might have.
Susan Snow Speaks. That will also be in the show notes, but thank you for that. You never know what questions or just information people might want some clarification on, or just to reach out to you. So thank you for having that availability.
Absolutely.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you're okay telling this whole story. You
Oh,
feeling
I'm
okay?
great. Yep,
Good.
I'm great.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think it's important to get the message out, and like I said, this is my purpose. So
Yeah.
this gives me joy, actually, to be able
Mm.
to do this.
Thanks again.
Thank
And
you.
thank everybody for listening. And I'll see you in a month.